So we got our second interview with on this. I haven't really named the podcast yet. I haven't named it. It's going to be something to do with Fireflies or Brave fans or something. But I am here with you, Joe. I'm here with you. I'm going to talk about your life, Joe. I'm going to talk about what you've been through and how you got to be a wrestling fan, and just because you do horror. You're a horror fan. You do horror podcasts. You do all kinds of different stuff. So, Joe, tell me about yourself. I know we talked a little bit on the Insiders episode over on Give Me a Hull, where we interviewed you guys together, but this is about you. So tell me about yourself and what drives you.
Wow. Well, let's see. We were just talking before the show started about my illustrious retail career. I'm a proud dad. I have two daughters. One is out of college. The other one just started college. I've been married to my wife for 27 years. That they are all pretty much my life. In fact, my daughter was the one who turned me on to podcasting. I think you and I talked about this. I was a DJ in college, way back in 1988, when there were still records, and I was spinning vinyl on my show that I did very late at night on a college radio station, which I really loved. Always been a huge music fan. And that's why I wanted to get into that. And that was always kind of my dream. Wanted to be a radio DJ. But unfortunately, where I live, the area I'm in, it's next to impossible, because there's DJs that are on stations here that were on DJ station, that they were DJs when I was a kid. So they've been around for 30, 40 years. When they get on the station, they just stay there. And so it wasn't really something I could do. And I went to college for it, went to college for journalism. And some people will ask, well, what's journalism? It doesn't really exist like it did anymore. It's different now. And, that's why when my daughter called me and she's like, Dad, you really should try podcasting. And I was like, man, I don't know. I said, I'm good with the phones and stuff. I'm not great with other tech. She's like, Dad, it's so easy. She said, there's this app you can just talk. You use your phone. You don't really have an app. And she was right. I started on an app called Anchor. Use that. I came up with an idea to do an 80s show because I loved the 1980s, graduated that year, went through that decade. And I started that with a friend of mine, and it was called I Lived the 80s. We did that for a little bit. And then I was in a chat similar to our chat that we have on our show. And it was a wrestling show. And I met a whole bunch of people. And just talking in there, and you just have those little side conversations with people when you're talking in a chat. And I happened to meet Jeff there, and so Jeff and I got to talking. We were always chatting about wrestling and stuff like that. And then I happened to talk to him, and he said, "Oh, I have a podcast." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, okay." And I'm like, "Well, maybe we can have each other on each other's show." So we planned that, and Jeff had me on his. And him and I just talked, and we talked about a lot of different stuff. And then we just got to talking about wrestling. So then after that was over, and we had never met. Jeff and I have never met personally, never. And so it's just over a screen. And after it was over, we're like, we really got this thing down. We should do a podcast. And I'm like, wow, you know what? That's a great idea. Jeff came up with the name. He's like, we were both fans of the NWO. So, of course, he came up with he's like, well, they've got the outsiders. Let's be the insiders. I'm like, that's fantastic.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that's what started it all. 3 years ago now. We were doing it through COVID. I was on break from work. He was as well. And, everybody was kind of locked in their house. You really didn't have much to do. So yeah, we started that, and he's the greatest behind the scenes guy ever. He does all the work. When I saw the first episode we did, the first episode we did literally was an award show from the prior year for wrestling. He made that look like a video, and we weren't doing video. We were just doing audio at the time, and he did this presentation with all these pictures and stuff that he was throwing in there. And I'm like, dude, it was amazing. And, normally an audio podcast on YouTube, it's tough to sell that. So, but he just, I could have asked for a better person to do it with. And he and I are just, it's great because he's kind of like, he reminds me of a nighttime DJ.
Oh yeah, it's the vocal, it's his voice.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yep, the smooth stylings of the nighttime guy, and it's great because we play off each other so well. Because I'm a little more hyper, and I'm a little more outgoing, and like not, I'm kind of not as reserved as he is, and that gets me in trouble sometimes. But Jeff is, but yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better person to do it with, and now we're doing it, and I love it because it leads back to my dream of what I wanted to do, which now, geez, 40 some years later, I don't want to give away my age, but I mean, well, I'm 53. So all these years later, and I'm living out a dream that I had when I was 18 years old.
That's why we're doing this, man, because if somebody else watches this and goes, "Oh, I'm too old," or "I'm too,
Nope.
I can't do this because of that," you know what I mean? And you look good for 53, dude.
Thank you.
You're a good looking lad. But one thing I'm interested, I'm so interested in your story. Obviously, the insiders I became a fan of because of Bray Wyatt, and we'll talk about Bray and wrestling in a minute. But I'm interested to know you've been working. You've been in sales for a long time, and you sell phones. Now, can you tell me about the transitional skills, the skills that you perhaps didn't think that you had when you went and built this podcast and started doing this and built it to few thousand, people now, and hundreds of people come and watch every week when you do your impact stuff, Abby's Window, all the things that you've built. What are the transitional skills that you perhaps didn't see, when you first started, that you maybe developed doing your sales work that you've taken into the podcast world?
It blows my mind. And still to this day, it does. When I get those little notifications from YouTube telling me how many people have viewed the show, we just got one that was 500,000. And I was like, oh my God, like it blows my mind. But yeah, I took one of the things, I mean, I was always a manager in retail. I've been in retail since I was 17. And then as I got into my mid 20s, I became a store manager, and I was always in management at retail. I almost went to the DM level, but I kind of didn't really like the travel and being away from the family as much as it would take a district manager to be. But yeah, what I use in the show, what I needed to learn and what I've been learning to do with the show is marketing. I never really got into that very much. Management, you did it a little bit, but usually the company always did it for you. But getting your name out there, because there are so many podcasts, and even to this day, I don't even understand all the metrics of YouTube, because it's crazy to even start to try to go through the math of how they do things. But I like it now. It could have been something that I might have looked into as a career back in the day if we had cell phones, and if we had all that. It's funny. I told my wife the other day, I said, I would have rocked college if I had a cell phone. But doing all that kind of stuff with that, like going on Twitter, going on Instagram, going on all the socials and talking about our show and getting it out there and putting posts up. I mean, I try to stay involved on Twitter as much as I can. I know a lot of people watch that during wrestling, so I'll pop up little clips. I'll take pictures of I'm sitting in front of my screen. My wife's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm taking pictures of what's going on TV," and then I'm putting them up on Twitter just because I'm just trying to get that interaction out there for the people who watch. And so that's a big part of it, and it's something that I'm still learning, which I'm grateful for. It's fun to learn new things. So marketing, I think, is a big one. Also, of course, my DJ stuff and being able to talk to the public, I think came in very handy for this. I thought and it's funny though, I was terrified when Jeff said to me, "We're going to do video." Terrified. And I'm like, oh man, I got so comfortable not being on camera. And then he's like, "Dude, we got to do video." And I felt bad for him at that point, because he was going through so much trouble making these things, trying to create these things to look good. And I'm like, you know what? I can't make him keep doing that. So the first night we were on video, I was nervous as hell. And then once we got going, and I'm like, I leaned on the DJ stuff. You know, you're not on video doing that. I leaned on that, and it was just very, very simple. I was just talking to people, and yeah, and that's they were I think two of the biggest skills that I've had, and I've always been one of the things that I pride myself on with my career. Is I've met and managed so many people, and to this day, they talk to me still. I have people that was, you know, kids who were 16, 17 that work for me that are now adults in excellent careers. They're doing really well for themselves. They'll talk to me through social media. Hey, how are you? You know, this and that, and talk on posts and stuff. And we keep in touch. And some of them that are still local come see me and chat with me. To me, that's the best compliment I could ever have.
Yeah, you built that connection, which is amazing, and I do want to talk about that connection you've built with the Insiders crew. But there is a detail that you mentioned earlier about how your daughter got you into podcasting. Does you know, do your family watch, listen to the Insiders? Are they proud of what you've done? Because again, you have built a very successful podcast. You know, there's a lot of wrestling podcasts out there. A lot of stuff, but you've carved a really cool niche for yourself because you're covering Impact Wrestling regularly. I love Impact. We'll talk about them in a minute. You obviously talking about Bray Wyatt as well. There's a lot of reasons why people tune into the Insiders. Do your family, you know, the daughter, all those people, do they support what you do, and do they listen to your to your wonderful work?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. My sister was one of the first ones who told me she listened to me on her smart TV. She's like, "You're on my television." She called me up and said, and it goes to show. I mean, I work in technology, and I had no idea. And I'm like, "Oh my God, I could put YouTube on my smart TV, and I could pull it up on there." I had no clue. And then, yeah, my daughter, of course, saw a few of my '80s shows. She's not into wrestling, but now my youngest, just went to her first wrestling show. She was the one who came to me, and she said, "Dad, Raw's going to be in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, close to where we live." She's like, "I want to go." And I'm like, "Wow, you want to go?" I'm like, "You've never watched wrestling?" She said, "No, I really want to go." She said, and it's funny because she said to me, and this was right around her graduation, because she had a party with a lot of her friends, and she's like, "All my friends know who you are." And she's like, and I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "They watch your show." And she said, "They're all wrestling fans, so they know who you are." She said, "A lot of them are coming to my graduation party. They want to meet you." And I'm like, "Oh my God, really?" I'm like, "Me?" And she's like, "Yep." She's like, and sure enough, when I was at the party, I went over and was talking to a bunch of them, and they're like, "Wow, man, we love your show. We're all big wrestling fans." And I'm walking around with these kids, and it was like, wow, that's kind of incredible. And my wife, you know, thankfully she's who she is, because my wife, you know, we have a very small house, 2-story, but it's a smaller house, and I don't have anything like a man cave or anything like that, like a lot of guys do. So this computer setup that I'm on now and everything, right in the middle of my middle room in the house downstairs. So luckily my wife is like, you know, she goes upstairs, she watches TV in her room. You know, I get animated, so a lot of times I'm loud, and my wife's like, "I'm gonna go to bed." She'll come down. "I'm gonna go to bed now." She can just keep it down just a little.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're all really supportive. My wife said, you know, a few times to me, she's like, "I could tell you really enjoy it. And I'm happy for you that, you know, that you got to do that." Because my wife has a scrapbook still from me when I used to do newspaper articles. I used to write articles about local sports and stuff like that. She had a scrapbook of all the articles that I have and stuff like that. So she's always been very, very supportive of me. Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of people behind me, my family, my friends. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, man. It's great to hear, because again, you're such a magnetic personality, Joe, and just a really friendly, welcoming, you know, personality. Someone that welcomed me into the Insiders fold, and I really appreciate that. You know, and one of the things that I do love so much about what you guys do is that focus on Impact Wrestling. Now, Impact Wrestling has traditionally been, for me in my journalism career, wrestling journalism, they have been the most giving and supportive platform over here in the UK. Why did you decide, when there's a lot of, I know you do WWE stuff as well, but there's a lot of platforms, they do the watch alongs, they do all that, and you're doing Impact Wrestling weekly. not just the pay-per-views, weekly.
Yep.
Tell me about that decision and why you decided to shine the spotlight of him on Impact Wrestling rather than, your WWE, which a lot of people do.
I have to give that to Jeff, because you know what? I hadn't watched TNA since the six-sided ring. And I gave up on it. I started, I got to that point, and I was a pretty big WCW watcher. I watched that all through the 90s until that kind of fell apart. And then when they got that ring, I was like, this just looks too gimmicky to me. And so I missed a lot of that, though, because now that I go back and see like AJ Styles when he was very young, and a lot of the wrestlers that were there, I missed a lot. Now I go back and watch a lot on YouTube. But Jeff had said to me, and oh man, I can't really even remember the conversation, but Jeff, well, no, you know what? The first time I got notified about it was C Wrestling. C Wrestling knew I loved horror stuff. So he sent me a video of Decay. And it was kind of graphic Decay. They were a little more, they're a little kind of tame now as compared to the video he sent me. I mean, there was a lot of blood, and there was, Rosemary was there, and Father James Mitchell, and the stuff that was Sue Young. And he showed me that, and I'm like, wow. I'm like, where's that? Is that that's on a wrestling show? And he's like, yeah, that's Impact Wrestling. I'm like, wow. I don't have to check that out. And then I got to talking to Jeff about it, and Jeff's like, dude, you would absolutely love it. And I'm like, where is this on? And there's like Access TV. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure I have Access TV, because I used to watch some musical stuff on there since I like music. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know, I have it. I started watching, and I'm like, oh, it's always difficult. And this is what I would tell anybody that's watching this even too. Give things a try, and it's very difficult in wrestling. It's almost like coming into a soap opera that's been going on for 20 years, because you're going to be confused, absolutely going to be confused. But if you stick with it, you'll start to, they'll kind of program you into the storylines that are going on. And when I jumped in, oh my God, I fell in love with it. And I'm like, wow, this is an amazing show. And as we started doing it over and over and over again, I found myself really, and I say this to our fans, it is my favorite show of the week. It absolutely is. I love what they do. I love the Knockouts division there is tremendous.
Best women's division in wrestling.
Tremendous. They spotlight them, which is fantastic. I love that they're not afraid to use talent in things like Wrestle House and like these little silly things that they do on the side. It's fantastic. It lets them show their creativity. A lot of these people are really, really creative people, and they get to be a little comedic and do some other things when they're not on every week show. And that's something where I think other wrestling companies can learn. Big companies have people that end up getting buried just because they don't have time for them. And, you could do these little things. And I know WWE tried a little bit with the 24/7 title. It didn't really work out, but I started getting favorites there. I love Rosemary. Absolutely love Rosemary. Yeah. Jeff got me a video of her talking to him. Jeff was telling her that I was supposed to go up to a meet and greet. That was the Bray meet and greet. Actually, I couldn't make it. And he got Rosemary to record a video for me, telling me welcome to the Hive and all this stuff. I was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. But I love her. Josh Alexander, absolutely love Josh. I think he's tremendous. And so many others that now I have new favorites. I have Killer Kelly, I think is awesome. Of course, Mickie James. I've always been a huge. Mickie is my favorite women's wrestler of all time. I absolutely love Mickie. But yeah, I love doing Impact. Is so much fun. And the thing I'd say about it too is there's no drama. There's no drama. You can get drama from outside for other wrestling places. A constant fights going on. WWE's great. AEW's great. Nope, this one sucks. That one sucks. You never hear that with Impact Wrestling, and I absolutely love that. Yeah. I absolutely love it. And then we got involved right when the whole Kenny Omega stuff happened. So then there's Kenny, who is this huge personality from New Japan, and now he's interacting with Impact. And I'm such a big comic book nerd. When he was doing the whole belt collector thing, I'm like, oh my God, he's Thanos. I'm like, this is fantastic. But yeah, and so I have to credit that all to Jeff, because to this day, Had he not told me about that, I would have forgotten about. He sent me the DM, but I kind of forgot about it. And had Jeff not told me about it, I'd never probably would have watched it. And since then, we're just like, you know what? We both love it. Let's do a watch along for it.
Yeah. Yeah, the other great thing, because I mean, one of the things that we get to do, again, we've been able to work with Rosemary, Mickey James, and Josh Alexander, and that's another sort of way that Insiders has developed. Is you've been doing talent interviews, you've been having people on the show, which I think is fascinating, because we pre-record all of our stuff, but you're having them on the show, contributing. And how is that? How is that for you? Because again, from a journalism standpoint, you're flexing those muscles again, because you're not just hosting, you're interviewing, and so what is that like?
It's, I didn't know, and again, I was nervous when we started doing that. I think one of our first interviews, oh my gosh, I think it was Holodead. Holodead may have been our first interview, and Holodead was, and I'm interacting with her on email, and she was fantastic, and she just kept saying how I don't usually do interviews, especially live. And she said, so, and I'm just thinking to myself, I just trying to make it as comfortable for her as I can. And I'm like, this is going to be really, really relaxed. It's no big deal. And once we got them on, and I'll tell you, one of the things Jeff and I love to do is our interviews. And you're probably right. It's the journalistic side of me, I guess. I find it fascinating just to talk to them. And I talk to them as people, not necessarily the stars that they were or are. And I just find it fascinating to hear their stories. We spoke to Thunder Rosa. We got lucky, too, because we were doing a lot of these during COVID. Well, they were sitting at home, too. So we got a lot of people because of that, just reached out via DMs or email. And a lot of them were like, of course they want to get themselves out there a little bit because there was nothing going on. And, hearing some of their stories, Thunder Rosa telling stories about how she spent time putting rings together and stuff like that in her early career, just to try to get up in the business. We spoke to Nikita Koloff, who I remember as a kid. And a fascinating story he told about how when they would go to arenas, they were being attacked by people with weapons. They'd literally come up to them with knives and try to stab them, thinking that they're these horrible Russians. But it's so fascinating to talk to these people and to hear their stories. Josh Alexander and his wife Jade actually were on a New Year's show with us. So they celebrated a new year with us. Both were on it, and it was fantastic. And I love it. That's when the fan in me comes out, because I get to ask them things that I would normally have wanted to ask, when I was young and watching wrestling in WWF and things like that. Oh my gosh, I would have loved to have talked to a Randy Macho Man Savage or a Roddy Piper, or, I would have loved it. And so that's the fanboy in me that comes out. So that's when I really get the fanboy out, is when we have wrestlers on the show. And I love it. And it's one of the greatest compliments. And I'm sure you get this too, when you ask them a question and they're like, wow, that's a really good question. Thanks. I appreciate you asking that. And then they'll tell you the stories. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. I think one of the best ones we had was with Rohit Raju, who was in Impact. What a great guy. And we're just shooting the breeze, and then he and I start going off about Star Wars, of all things, and then he does his Macho Man Randy Savage impression for us at the end of the interview, and it was tremendous. He sounded amazing. It's great. That's what. And you're right. That was my dream. At that time, I never really thought of wrestling, but I was thinking of being a guy who would talk to the athletes from football, baseball games, this and that. That's what I wanted to do. So that is really bringing out my dream. And I absolutely love it. The more interviews we could do, the better. It's harder now because, of course, the wrestlers are working constantly and it's harder to get people. But the more of those we do, oh my gosh, it's awesome. I love it.
Man, I got so much respect for where you're at, man. Again, living that dream.
Yep.
And that's the paramount thing of this chat. I want to talk about your passions outside of wrestling, and this is going to circle nicely to the Bray portion of our chat. But it's your passion for horror. Now, I am a massive. I'm a big scaredy cat. I struggle with horror. I've got morbid curiosity. So I always had it for Jason. I had it for Freddie and for Michael, of course. So, and there is that kind of, again, intrigue for me, but you've got a passion for it. Like you don't get scared. You don't hide behind the cat. You know, you there's that passion there. So tell me about that. Where does that come from?
Had to be my mom, because when I was young, now a lot of those movies when they came out. So the first Halloween obviously came out in 1977. I was 8 years old. There's no way I could have watched it when I was that young. So I didn't get to start seeing a lot of these films until they started coming out on VHS and on videotape. People be like, what the heck is VHS? When they came out for the VCR, when I was able to see them when I was like 13, 14 was when around the time I saw it. But my mom used to have books, paperback novels. Now, people may not know this, but before films came out back in that day, they would release the novel first. So you got to kind of read the book first, and then they made a movie from that book. So my mom would have these things sitting on her nightstand, and they were some of Stephen King. She had the original Halloween novel. She had the novel from The Exorcist. She had all these books. And first thing I would say to her is, Mom, how do you read these things right before you go to bed? That was the first thing I'd ask. And then I started getting into, I want to say, I think the first one, now I watched, and I will say this, slasher movies I love. There are certain types of horror that I will not watch because they're a little, they get me a little bit. And the stuff I don't like is the demonic possession stuff. And I think that's because I saw The Exorcist much too young. Okay. And I think it just ruined me on that. And I'm like, eh. But yeah, so, and I said, I talked to my mom about it, and she just always loved it. And then I started watching the movies as we got old enough to watch them. And I grew to love, when I saw Halloween, and it's still my favorite horror movie to this day, the original Halloween, 1978. I love John Carpenter, big fan of his. And I love the music that he does for the movies and stuff like that. And when I saw that, I'm like, wow, this is absolutely incredible. And he made it so raw where it could happen anywhere. It's something that before he became the guy who, yes, nobody can kill, we could shoot him thousands of times and he can't die. That first movie, though, didn't have any of that. It was just some random dude killing random kids who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so it's kind of terrifying when you think about it, because he didn't have a motive, and until they wrote that in later on, which Carpenter never really wanted. And then I saw Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th and I have become synonymous with one another. And it's the weirdest thing. I have people wishing me happy birthday now every single Friday the 13th. It is not my birthday. They'll do that on Facebook and they'll say, happy birthday, Joe, because I'm such a big fan of Jason. I have no clue. My wife's always like, people associate you with a psychopathic killer who goes around in a hockey mask just killing people. I said, I'm aware. I'm like, but I don't know. It's the weirdest thing. We even back in the day, myself and my friends there were these things called lip sync contests back in the day where people would actually sing along. It was kind of like karaoke, and they would sing along. There were shows on TV that they did it. We did one in high school, and it was to Alice Cooper's "The Man Behind the Mask" song, which was from Friday the 13th. I, of course, was Jason in the video, and so from there on, I watched them all. And so Nightmare on Elm Street came along, and Scream came along, and it just kept going and going and going, and I just became a huge fan of it. I like the man. It's funny because I think I end up liking the killer more than I like the people in it, which I think that's kind of how they want you to be, because the people in it are kind of dumb. When you always look at them, they're like, why are you hanging around here? Why not escape from the thing? But I love the aspect. Horror films can make you, they're kind of a release, because you sometimes you get all these pent up anger and emotion when you watch the things. You get that sense of being frightened by something, whether it's and I'll tell you, I never really realized how powerful music was until I started watching horror. And that's why I love Carpenter, because again, the original Halloween, you watch that and turn the music down, it's not even scary. It's not even scary. But then you hear the music.
Oh yeah.
And it's like you get those jump scares and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely got it from my mom. I started reading some horror books. I read a lot of Stephen King. And to this day, I cannot be more thrilled. I think it's going to be in October of next year. They finally got the lawsuit settled with Friday the 13th. They're doing a series on Peacock called Crystal Lake. And I am I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah, man. I always felt for Jason. I always thought Jason would make a great anti-hero.
Yes.
Because
yes.
Of all of them, I felt for Jason the most. Like, I get, like whatever you think. Like, I get that Michael had his mental health issues and all that stuff, and obviously, I'm not saying there was an excuse. Freddie, of course, no excuse. But with Jason, I was like, okay, like this guy. There's something here. You could turn him easily into an anti-hero, I think, and I always like that.
It's funny you mention that, because Stephen King talked about him about 2 years ago, and he said he wanted to do a book and a movie about him, and he wanted to do the book and the movie from Jason's perspective, so where you would know what he's thinking, because he never spoke. No. So you would know what's going through his mind. And you're absolutely right. It was tragic what happened to him. He was basically a paraplegic boy who drowned in a lake because the counselors weren't paying attention to him. Yeah. And obviously his mother was crazy, but he drowned, and it's a tragic story. And then he comes back to life, and he goes on a hunt to try to protect his wilderness, basically, which is what it is. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It would be great to see, and that's why there were, what was it, 1, 2, 3, 4 novels that came out for 4 of those Friday the 13th films, and I read them all. And it was great because a lot of it in those books was from Jason's perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go back after this. I'm going to go and find those books and read them, because I always thought it was a missed opportunity. Yeah. Because of all the legendary, iconic, horror characters, Jason was the most misunderstood. I think. Is there anything that moves me on to a question nicely? Is there anything that you feel like has been remade that's been done well? Because there are a lot of less than stellar remakes. Is there anything that you almost think is perhaps better than the original that they've redone?
Oh boy, that's a great question. Hollywood is just filled with remakes. No, it almost seems like nobody has original ideas anymore. Oh man, if you look at any of the slasher franchises, it's tough to say. The first Halloween that came out, I wasn't a fan of Zombies Halloween. I know a lot of people are. I wasn't a fan. I didn't like, and John Carpenter made a similar statement about it. He used a wrestler to play Michael, and he was too big. He was towering, 7 feet tall, and John Carpenter had said originally that I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted it to be an everyman. I wanted it to be a person who looked like a normal person, not some giant of a man. And I agree, and that's why those never sat well with me. Plus, they made that movie for you to feel for Michael. They showed him as a small boy. So you kind of got the feel for him in those movies. And again, that to me was kind of a little bit of I don't know, it shook it up. I did like the first one of these recent ones. Halloween, it was they just call it, I think, Halloween.
It was Halloween Kills. They had
Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. But the first one in that series, I enjoyed that. Kills got a little far-fetched, and then the last one was very, very different. I see what they were trying to do, but it was a little bit hard to get across to people. But I enjoyed that. The Scream that just came out, I think it was last year, wasn't bad. Like, they keep trying to reinvent nostalgia, which is hard to do. They bring the characters back from some of the movies and things and do the best they can, but man, I just kind of wish someone would get, I think it was, I'm going to tell Jeff, I think it was the Saw movie that came out that Chris Rock was in about 3 years ago. I'll tell you what, that was enjoyable. And I didn't know how I'd react to it because a lot of the Saw sequels were horrible. But that was actually good. So there are some people who are doing a good job with it. I just watched the recent Hellraiser remake, which was...
I've heard good things, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? It was good because it was different. They had a woman cast as Pinhead, which changed a lot of it right up, up right there. And I enjoyed it. I thought they did a good job with it. I don't think it's a bad idea for them to do remakes. Just don't try to follow the same thing all the time. Make it your own, and try to do something a little different with it. But yeah, it's, I'd imagine it's hard. And the thing is, and I read this a few times, they make so much money on horror films because they're so cheap to make. A slasher film especially, they're some makeup effects and this and that. That's really it. They don't use a lot of special effects. So those movies are very, very cheap to make. And if they make, they make 100 million, they've made a ton of money on that. So they're all going to try to keep doing it because it's just they're money makers.
It's an interesting point you make. I hadn't thought about it like that. This is why it's so useful for me to chat to you, Joe. And I think moving on to the next strand of this chat, is it your love of horror and storytelling that made you fall in love with Bray Wyatt?
Yes,
as a character.
100%. I didn't know him from NXT. I never really watched much NXT, so I did not know he was there. I didn't know him from FCW. I saw him first when they started the vignettes of the Wyatt family. And right away, what clicked in my head when I saw those, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Boom, just like that. And Texas Chainsaw was a little bit scary. The original one's scary. It's terrifying. I remember watching it over my cousin's house. I went down in my basement. And I found my dad's chainsaw, and I'm down there, and I go back up. Our houses were connected. We lived right next door to one another. So I go over next door, and they're still sitting upstairs after we watched the movie, and I'm downstairs, and I'm revving up a chainsaw, and they're terrified. I'm like, and they're like, oh my God, my cousin, she almost ran out of the house. But the original Texas Chainsaw is terrifying. It really, Toby Hooper's was amazing, and it's scary. And that's what the Wyatt family reminded me of. Here are these three guys. They look like a family that could live in some house in some rural town somewhere that is out in the middle of nowhere. And if your car breaks down, these are the last people you are going to want to come and try to help you or do something, because you're not going to live through that. And that's exactly what they reminded me of. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, this is going to get over, because these three guys are menacing. And the further they went with it, when they got to the point where they went with the sheep masks and all that stuff, I was like, wow, this is, and Bray to me was Max Cady. Bray to me was Max Cady from that film. The name escapes me now. Oh my gosh. It's a famous film too. But he is the manipulator, the one who is going to kind of, like a cult leader, which they call him cult leader Bray. He's the guy who's going to get you hooked in and is going to bring you in. He's the one in charge of these two big dudes with him. They're his muscle. They're going to take care of whatever he wants them to do.
Cape Fear.
Cape Fear. Thank you. Yes. Fantastic film. The one with Robert De Niro, I know it was a remake, but I absolutely love that movie. And De Niro was, and again, I look at Bray and you compare him to De Niro, and he's a manipulator. He's not afraid of anything or anyone, and he knows what he knows what he wants. He has revenge on his mind, and he's going to get it no matter what he does. And yes, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm absolutely going to love it. And for me, that came about after the Undertaker had kind of started going in a different direction. And so the Undertaker is what filled the horror part of it in for me before that, because I mean, who can beat that? That was tremendous. But then when he started kind of coming to the end of his career and things were changing, he was a different person. That's when right when Bray came in, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I bought in right from the beginning.
Yeah. And I think that there's something to be said for the community that you've built around Bray on the insiders. Now, you've brought other people into that. Jody is one example, but you've also connected with hundreds of people who I've been in the chats and I've been on the streams where people have said, this has made my day, made my week, helps me through something. How do you feel as someone that's cultivated, you've taken your connection with a character and then connected that with hundreds of other people on the insiders? How does that feel?
It's crazy how many people really have gotten into that character, and all the iterations of the character through. I mean, Jody we knew from that same wrestling chat. We spoke to her in that chat, and then all of a sudden we realized what a big fan she was of that. And she was never really even a wrestling fan, but she started getting into it when the whole Bray thing started with the Wyatt family. And so we kind of said, well, you're a really big fan of Bray. Why don't you come on our show? And we brought her on board, and then she just started doing this, and that's what led to Abby's. But yeah, it blows my mind. He's got a really unique fan base and a very rabid fan base, like very, very, very dedicated people that no matter what he does. And I'll tell you what, I kind of went that direction a little bit with it, because when he left, so right after the whole thing with Matt Hardy, and when he left the company, I stopped watching. Mm-hmm. I got upset, and I'm like, you know what? I'm done. And I stopped watching it for a while. And then when we saw that, and then I can remember almost every day on my phone, I'd go and look for, there has to be something out there about him. And I type in Bray Wyatt, nothing. Type in Bray Wyatt, nothing. And then all of a sudden, we see that Dollhouse promo, and I'm like, oh my God, this is him coming back. And then you saw the one after the other. I'm like, and when I saw that, I'm like, okay, he's playing a demented Mr. Rogers. From my childhood, he's playing an evil Mr. Rogers. And this goes back to Jason. When I saw The Fiend, that's Jason Voorhees. He comes behind people, grabs them, gives them the mandible claw, puts them down. He's indestructible. You can't hurt him. I'm like, oh my God, this is his version of Jason. And I bought in hook, line, and sinker. I have a whole entire shelf right behind me of all Bray merch.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And what is it, going to you personally, what is it that connects with you? Because again, we talked on the insider stream quite a lot about the sort of, especially this new iteration of the Bray character, the mental health stuff, and again how he says that he's that we've saved his, or we as the fans have saved his life, and Jody will say that he saved hers, and you and I have talked quite openly about mental health before. Is that the connection that you have with the character? Obviously, beyond the horror and the visuals. What is that connect? What is it that connects you to that character?
Sure, I think so. I mean, I think that for me, and I think that even if you really dive into like being a fan of stuff like that or horror stuff, I think it's because you want to maybe be a little more open. You want to be able to express yourself a little bit more. And I also like to be challenged by stuff. Now, a lot of times you could watch wrestling and it's pretty much you're just sitting, you're being entertained. But these deep storylines that I heard you guys talking about on Abby's tonight, that's what I like. I don't care how long they go. You give me a payoff for something like that, and I'm over the moon with it, because that's what I want to see. And maybe that goes back to me watching certain things that I'm seeing. And younger folks that are listening to this won't really know this, but when you're watching serial TV back in the 70s and 80s, you always had a cliffhanger every single episode. Sometimes you had a cliffhanger that would go at the end of the season and wait until the next season came on in the fall. So you'd be waiting all summer. Like, I mean, I go to the TV series Dallas. My mom used to watch. It was kind of like a soap opera when JR got shot. Who shot JR? That went on for an entire summer. No one knew the ending until it started the next year. So I'm used to that, and I like it. And it challenges you, because it makes you want to do what we do, and that's talk about theories, theorize.
Yeah.
And you can then make up your own, and that's part of the fun. And sure, you may not be right, but it's great coming up with, like, Hanzo, I was listening tonight, had some amazing theories.
Oh, yeah.
It's great coming up with stuff like that and thinking of, how is this going to play out? How is he going to go and do this? And the new stuff, I mean, to me, it's probably as deep as he's been yet, because he's going into, well, who is this? Is Howdy is he just another personality of Bray? Is that Bray talking to himself? And I'm trying to make it into this deep thing. Well, what's the tier? I heard Hanzo say, see me? I think that's him with that mask on with a tear, because he does not want to be that man. And so you're seeing him crying because he doesn't want to be stuck in that personality, and he can't get out. So, but the people that we interact with, and the people that you interact with and we interact with, and people that are on Twitter and all the socials, oh my God, there's people that are dedicating websites to him. They have their channel dedicated to him. They have their Twitter handle is something with Bray. That's got to be an amazing feeling. And it's incredible. And how he brings people in like that. And it's not just the 15-year-olds or the 20-year-olds. It's a 53-year-old man. I mean, which is crazy. But yeah, I'm absolutely floored by the community that we have, and the people that just come out to Abby's because they want to just talk about Bray.
Yeah, man. But you're the glue that connects everything to, you're part of the glue that connects everyone together, man. It's a beautiful thing, and it was a wonderful discovery for me at a time when I needed it, because I was looking for answers, and the insiders gave me that. You guys gave me that, and I will forever be grateful for that. And also grateful to know you, because I love listening to you talk about storytelling, about your passion for horror. Like, I've learned some new stuff. So I'm going to go read those Jason books. You know what I mean? So I love talking to you about this stuff. Before we finish up, I want to ask you about. I talked to the group when we did the Give Me a Whole Year interview about highlights, about the reason why it's so special. But I want to single out, for you, whether it's been your 80s podcast, whether it's been the insider stuff, what have been some of the moments that you will, you're 53 now, when you're 70, 80, 90, beyond, I hope. I hope we're talking for many years from now. But what will be the things that you look back on and go, holy S word, I can't believe that happened. That was a beautiful moment for me. Whether it could be, it doesn't have to be insiders related. It could be family related. Give me some beautiful moments in your life, man.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll go back to, you want to relate something to wrestling. And my father passed away about 3 years ago on Christmas Eve, actually. And my father and I were never really close. I mean, he divorced my mom. So I kind of was the guy who looked after my sister at that point, because he left the house. And so we were never really super, super close. But the one thing about wrestling in particular that I will always remember is my dad taking me to a show that was just in a small little, they used to have wrestling shows in little gymnasiums. And there was one in our area, and he took me to see it. Oh my gosh, I had to be probably seven or eight maybe. And Andre the Giant was at the show.
No way.
And I was, and I knew who he was because I was watching Saturday Morning Wrestling at the time. And so, and you see him get into this little tiny ring that's in this gymnasium. It's like, and as we were leaving, my dad was talking to some people that he knew, and I'm standing next to him. And all of a sudden Andre comes walking out of the locker room, and he literally comes over and walks up to me, and I'm looking at him and staring up, and he puts his hand, and I know you see that video where he puts his hand on people's face. Well, he stuck his hand on my head. His hand literally engulfed my entire head. And then he asked me, and he's like, he said, "You like wrestling?" And I said, yeah. And he said, "Who's your favorite wrestler?" And I looked at him and I said, "Andre the Giant." And he said, "You're a good boy." And then
wow.
And then at that time, I'm looking at my dad. I'm like, "Dad, do you have a pen? Because I wanted to get his autograph, and I'm like, Dad, do you have a pen? And of course, my dad didn't have a pen. Nobody cared. You didn't have cell phones back then, so there's no pictures, no anything, and nobody had. Of course, there was never any record of anything of it. But that moment was really what started me as a wrestling fan, and I had watched it ever since. And then it's what got me into wrestling. And who would have thought you meet a guy like Andre the Giant, a legend in the business, and it was just an amazing moment, and it was something that I will remember always, because again, my dad was there, my dad took me, and again, when I had thoughts of that, when I took my daughter to see that Raw, and after the show was over, she turns to me and she goes, "This was really awesome, Dad." And she goes, and by the way, I like that Matt Riddle and Seth Rollins are pretty hot. I'm like, oh, okay.
Amazing.
All right. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that story, man. The Andre story, that's beautiful.
It was awesome.
That is special, man. Not everybody could say that.
Yeah,
I bet you still remember that. I bet you.
Oh my God, his
right?
hand literally engulfed my head, and I mean, I don't have a small head, and his hand was literally right over the top, like you could see parts of his fingers come out. I mean, he could have squashed my head if he wanted to, but yeah, I'll never forget it, and it was just like time stopped, and my dad's friends were turning around and they're looking over at me, and they see him standing there, and I'm like, oh, it was amazing, and what a nice guy, like what an absolutely nice guy.
Beautiful.
And yeah, it was awesome.
Beautiful, really man. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Well,
absolutely.
Before we do the plug-in bit, I want to ask if you had a message for anyone that supported you. Obviously, there's people that weekly tune into the Insiders for your Impact stuff, for Abby's Window. You mentioned obviously your family were the people that got you into podcasting. Anything you would say to anybody that continues to support you, has supported you in the past, and will continue to do so as you go forward in your podcasting career, in your career in general, life in general.
Yep. Well, first of all, I am, like I said to you earlier, I'm overwhelmed. And I say this to the people on my show as many times as I can. And just a huge thank you. Because without them, Jeff and I would just be sitting there on our own talking to each other about wrestling, which it's great, but having that audience, they just give you the energy, they just bring their comments and stuff like that. And one of the things that I think makes us a little unique is the fact that, sure, could we have thousands and thousands of people in the chat? I mean, yeah, there are places that do, but I think one of the nice things about us having a smaller show is I can go down that list of the chat and I can read people's comments, and I love doing it because you know what? Same. It reminds me of when I'm younger and takes me back to my DJ days. You call up a DJ on a radio station and you ask them to play a song. It was the greatest thing ever when they'd answer that phone and be like, "Yeah, I got you. And I'm going to play that for you." And then you hear it come on. And they're like, "This goes out to whoever." And I liken that to the chat comments. And so when I see them say that, it could be something so small to you. But when I see them say something, I read it because I'm like, you know what? This could make someone's day. 100%. And as small as that is, I'm going to do that because it's a privilege for me that they're watching me. Yep. And listening to me when they could be doing any number of things with their life. And so my appreciation is to just look at their comments and read that comment and give them the time of day and let people know that, hey, you know what? I appreciate that you have that comment there. And I appreciate that you are coming out and listening to our show when you've got countless other options that you could listen to. So, and as far as giving people advice, I said it earlier, follow a dream, and I know that's a cliche, and I'll say a quote from Jim Henson. So Sesame Street, the Muppets, I grew up on all that. Jim Henson had a song from the first Muppet movie, and there's a quote in the song called "Life's like a movie, write your own ending, keep believing, keep pretending. We've done just what we've set out to do. Thanks to the lovers, the dreamers, and you. Life's like a movie. I love that quote. Keep pretending is my favorite line. I used my imagination for things when I was a kid, and I still do to this day. And you know what? You can be 10, you can be 30, you can be 50 or 60, and you could still go to faraway places because of your imagination. And I would tell everybody to do that.
That's a beautiful thing. I've never heard it said like that before. That's the power of the imagination, Joe. So thank you so much for that. And the last bit is the plugging. So is there anything you feel like I've missed? Anything you want to plug and promote before we finish up today?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. Come out and watch. We have, of course, like you had mentioned, we do Impact every Thursday night. We do, I'll tell you, the one show that we really, really, really enjoy doing, Jeff and I, and this takes us back to our roots, is our Sunday show. It's called Between the Ropes with the Insiders. We just basically take a look back at everything that happened in wrestling, try to kind of break some of the stuff down and go over all that. And it's just him and I doing what we started out to do. And I think a lot of times that show gets a little neglected with the watch-alongs and stuff that we do, but we absolutely love that. It's a time where Jeff and I really just get to sit down and kind of go back and forth and talk about the stuff that we really love. And if there's any one show that we do that's really that brings out the roots of what we are, it's that show that we do on Sunday. So we're going to try to do it more because we don't get to do it as much. That's one of the shows we don't get to, because life happens. Jeff's got his kids, things happen, so you don't get together as much. But that one for sure, because that really goes back. You want the roots of what the Insiders are. That's definitely the show that comes from. So, and then the watch-alongs, of course, Impact. We'll do all the pay-per-views. We also do a lot of the WWE pay-per-views as well. So, and the occasional one that people will ask us for. Sometimes somebody will want to watch something. I think we did a Control Your Narrative watch along once, and just, anything that's out there that kind of looks like it's going to be fun. We're always open to stuff. Absolutely,
man. Absolutely. Well, please go and check out the Insiders, guys. And Joe, thank you so much for sharing your love of horror, your love of wrestling with me. I appreciate it, man.
Anytime, man. Welcome to the family, and we love having you.